everybody, welcome back to the channel. Well, it's often been said that if you had to choose only one typewriter to have, you'd probably want to have a semi-portable typewriter. It has the portability of a lightweight machine, but more of the features of a full-size standard machine. And these two typewriters, mid-20th century American made, are very indicative of the semi-portable typewriter. In fact, these are probably the most sought-after specimens for American-made semi-portable typewriters. We have the Smith Corona Silent Super and the Royal Quiet Deluxe. I think this is going to be a fantastic comparison. Which one would you choose if you could only have one of them? Let's find out. Stay tuned. These two typewriters, there's a lot of similarities and there's some differences. It's interesting that they were competitors in the mid-20th century, basically the 1950s. And it's very interesting that they chose to go after their respective markets in slightly different ways, with slightly different strategies. Well, first of all, my specimen of the Silent Super is the gray and dark green. They did have, Smith Corona sold some colored versions. There was a green, there was kind of a desert sand, there was the light blue and the pink one. But I think really Royal had a better spectrum, a wider spectrum of colors on their machines, and they certainly understood, I think, the growing market for domestic typewriters. Typewriters not used in a business or office setting, but more used at home or by students, and that was certainly the appeal of having a more colorful typewriter. Here we go. Let's compare the typewriters, shall we? Well, size-wise, the footprint of the Royal Quiet Deluxe is just a little bit smaller than the Silent Super, but the Royal Quiet Deluxe is a little taller, and you especially notice this with the front face, the front of the ribbon cover right behind the rear row of keys. It just rises up much more steeply. Here you can see the difference in depth from front to back between the two machines. The Smith Corona is about 7/8 of an inch larger than the Quiet Deluxe. As far as the height of the machines, however, it's close to 5 inches. And it's a little over 6, almost 6 1/4 on the Royal. So the Royal is definitely a taller machine than the Smith Corona is. Smith Corona, of course, is deeper. And then as far as the width goes, they're both about 12 3/4 inches from the outside of each platen knob to the other knob, not including the way the carriage release lever sticks out here. So very similar. They're within 1/8 of an inch of having the same length of platen. One other major difference between the keys, of course, is the Silent Super has that feature where the keycaps stay flat during their stroke, and they kind of travel in an arc that sort of mimics the curve arc of your fingertip, whereas the Royal Quiet Deluxe is a more traditional pivot. It just pivots down like that. Okay, one difference between these machines is the Silent Super has a full key set tabulator. You have your tab set and clear on the right side of the keyboard here. The tab key is right next to it. Whereas the Quiet Deluxe, the tab key is also on the upper right corner of the keyboard, but it has adjustable tab stops. There are 6 of them back here, and they push and slide. These are fixed on the tabulator bar, but they do push and slide. Very similar to a more traditional margin type setting. And getting to the point of margins, on the Silent Super, you have some simple push and slide margins, very easy to use. I like the design of it. It has this silver tab that's kind of arced on top with some knurling and a nice bright red little kind of a diamond pointer symbol for the tab itself. Very elegant and simple. However, the Quiet Deluxe has the magic margin feature, and I covered in the last comparison video, we covered the comparison between the Silent Super and the Hermes 3000. Hermes 3000 has a very similar kind of pseudo magic margin, but I really like the way the Royal magic margin works a little bit better. The Hermes 3000 has the overly complicated ribbon indicator that it's a cloth red ribbon that runs inside the paper bail to give you a visual indication of your margin. I just like the way the Quiet Deluxe works better. That being said, however, there is no visual indication of where your margin actually is at with the Royal. That's maybe the only downfall of that design, is you don't know where the margin is just by looking at the machine. You have to literally move the carriage back and forth and figure it out. There's no indicator, but it's really easy to set. These two machines are from slightly different eras of the 1950s. These particular samples. My Quiet Deluxe is from 1957, the year of my birth. The Silent Super is from like 53, I think it is. So my Silent Super does not have the number 1 key or the plus equals, whereas, of course, the Quiet Deluxe does. But they both have the backspacer on the left side of the keyboard, which is kind of a pretty standard American layout, and the margin release on the right side of the keyboard. I kind of like the MARL, M-A-R-R-E-L indication on the Quiet Deluxe rather than just M-R on the Silent Super. So the bichrome setting on both machines is also in the upper right area. This Silent Super, it's just above the tab here, and it slides up and down vertically, whereas on the Quiet Deluxe it slides horizontally left and right. The spacebar on the Quiet Deluxe is shorter than the Silent Super, but it sticks up above from the frame of the machine, whereas on the Silent Super it's kind of at the same level as the molding of the machine, and so it depends on what your preferences are. I really don't notice any particular difference between them, really. The carriage return lever on the Quiet Deluxe is quite a bit shorter than on the Silent Super. It only extends out to about this far, roughly 2/3 of the way out to the front of the ribbon cover, where on the Silent Super, its carriage release lever goes all the way out to the round down to the front edge of the ribbon cover, and so definitely a little bit more easy to reach. I might also point out that there is, on this era of Silent Super, there is a manual ribbon reversing lever on the upper left corner. On the Silent Super, you have a touch control right here on the left side, whereas on the Quiet Deluxe, push a button to open it up. It's also on the left side, and its manual ribbon reversing lever is right behind the touch selector. So they're both in similar positions in terms of both the touch and the manual reverse, but the Silent Super, you have access to the reversing without lifting the ribbon cover. Okay, user controls. On the Quiet Deluxe, there is a scale down on the bottom of the carriage below the platen. You can read off your line position right below your print position here, and you have a similar kind of scale on the Silent Super here below the platen. The Silent Super, of course, has a paper scale behind the platen. That also serves as the indication for the margin settings, whereas on the Royal, you have a scale on the paper bail. But when you open up the rear panel to access the tabs, on the Quiet Deluxe, the tabs have their own scale also. As with most medium-sized portables, you do have carriage release controls on both the left and the right side, and I find the Royals, even though the levers are a little bit smaller, they're closer to the knobs, and so it's easier just to pinch. You can just grab it easier. When you go to grab the carriage knob, it just falls in hand, whereas on the Silent Super, the carriage release lever is a little bit, it's over an inch, maybe an inch and a quarter behind the knob. And so when you just grab the knob, you don't have the lever. You have to kind of think about reaching your index finger way over to get it. I find it just not quite as ergonomic as on the Royal, where you can quite easily just pinch it and grab it as one continuous motion. On this particular series of Royal, the paper bail has just 2 rubber rollers, whereas the Silent Super here has 3. Another commonality on both of these machines is actually the end of page system. They both have that little dial indicator on the left edge of the platen roller, but both systems work a little bit differently. My friend Kevin and I were trying to figure out the Quiet Deluxe's end-of-page indicator, and it wasn't nearly as intuitive as the Smith Coronas, and I think they probably did that on purpose because they didn't want to infringe on any Smith Corona patents. This particular era of Silent Super has a carryover feature from the older Smith Coronas, which is the paper fingers. These two metal fingers that you can use to support the far left and right edge of the paper. And some people like these and some people don't. I find they're quite handy if you're using full-size width sheets of paper, but if you're using half-width paper, they do get in the way because you kind of need a little bit wider margin in order to use this on the edge of the paper and still be able to have the ribbon vibrator not interfere with that paper finger. So for narrow columns, they're kind of a nuisance, and I push them out of the way. And I do a lot of narrow column typing, really because of blogging and whatnot on narrower sheets of paper. So one important difference I noticed between the way these two machines operate is pertaining to the escapement system. On the Royal, when you push a key, you hear a click as the type bar reaches and nears the ribbon. But the carriage doesn't move until after you've printed and when you're letting off on the key. And on my machine, you get to be about an inch. When the type bar is about an inch back from the platen, the full spacing happens. Whereas on the Smith Corona, it actually advances the carriage just before you hit the platen. This one is about an inch, like that. So Smith Corona spaces before it prints, Royal spaces after it prints. Is there any intrinsic advantage between the two? Well, I only have these two machines to go by, and I also had a Smith Corona Sterling and I had a Smith Corona Silent. All three of those machines did have some intermittent skipping issues that I had to address involving cleaning and degreasing the escapement. I haven't had any skipping issues on the Royal. That's not a real scientific measurement, however, because it's just one sample size. However, that being said, if you had to service both of these machines for escapement issues, you would find that on the Smith Corona, the whole escapement mechanism is readily accessible right here. It's one of the most easily accessible escapements on any kind of a typewriter like this. Whereas the Royals, the escapement is a little bit buried behind the linkages here. It's down in there, but it's a little harder to get to. So if I had to choose one of these typewriters strictly for ease of service, I think, without a doubt, it would be the Smith Corona. And one of the other features that makes the Smith Corona quite attractive, of course, at least the Silent and Silent Super, is the easy-to-remove platen, designed for the user to remove it and clean underneath it. The platen isn't all that difficult to take out on the Royal, but it's not like user serviceable. It's not intended to be, at least. Now, another difference in design philosophy between these two machines is the paper release lever. On the Smith Corona, it's really releasing the spring tension for the paper pan underneath where the pressure rollers are connected to. And it has quite a bit of a throw, and you're sort of pulling this lever against the spring tension. You have a real sense of you're pulling against the spring. On the Royal, however, what you're doing is there's a set of geared linkages like that rotates a bar that pulls the pressure rollers out of the way, and it's much easier to operate. You don't have the sense of a heavy spring you're pulling against. You're just really rotating a shaft. Just a difference. It feels different. Both machines have what you might call rabbit ear style paper support, right? Indicative of the old television antennas of the era. The Royals has two nice little red dots on the end of them. And I also noticed the Royal has two positions for its paper support. There is a middle position and an upper position like that, whereas the Smith Coronas really just has one position, although you could sort of try keeping it halfway, but there's a little bit of a spring tension that wants to snap it closed if you get beyond a certain point, whereas the Royals isn't really spring-loaded, so you can kind of put it at any particular position. So on the left side of the carriage, you have your line spacing selector on both machines, and on both of these, it says 1, 2, 3, and they are indeed 1 and 2 line and 3 line spacing. The Royal, the one position is toward the rear. On the Smith Corona, the one position is toward the front. That's really about the only difference. They both have the push button clutch release for the line spacing, and they also have a lever to disengage temporarily the line spacing ratcheting, which allows you to go back to your original line spacing afterwards. And on the Smith Corona, that lever is right here in front. Well, I'd be remiss in this comparison if I ignored the cases themselves. This is the Quiet Deluxe's case. This is the holiday case for the Smith Corona. Smith Corona came in 2 different style cases. It also came in the more squarish, dark leatherette case rather than the holiday case. I really actually like the look of this fabric-covered Quiet Deluxe case. There's just something about it, and if you see one of these at a thrift store, you know what kind of typewriter it is just from the style of it. It has the normal pinch clasp opening. There's a document holder in the lid here, a spring-loaded document holder, and it has the nice rotating clips here on either side. The machine fits into the case very easily. There is a set of locating pins here and here, and this is the little a key that fits into the rear slot on the back of the typewriter. And the top lid will slide off sideways if you want to keep the typewriter in the bottom half of the case and type on your lap. That's pretty handy. But I really like the looks of these Quiet Deluxe cases. They really are nice. The holiday case. So they are kind of a plasticky looking case. They have a set of feet on the bottom that you can set it up like that. So it has again a pinch clasping closure mechanism. And it also has the quick removal lid mechanism. It has a little spring-loaded little clip you have to push on both latches to get the hinges to disconnect. Because of the plastic nature of the holiday case, you might have issues with it. Mine, the edge is warped a little bit, and there's some cracked parts along the edge here. So mine, it's kind of difficult to reconnect one of the hinges here because of the way it's warped. The reason why they called it a holiday case is because the mechanism here, let's talk about that first. The mechanism that holds the typewriter in place, it fits in the back slot right here. It pushes down. There's a spring here on the front, and this is a single lever right here on the left side that releases the typewriter. But there's a lever down here by the lock, and if you flip that lever back, you can remove this entire cross-shaped bracket, take it out, and now you can use this for a small piece of luggage for traveling. That's why it was called a holiday case. You know, you could put a little bar set in there or toiletries or whatever, right? So this thing fits back on the rear bracket. The front clips back into place like that, spring-loaded. Boom, it goes back into place and you can put your typewriter back in there. They are quite ingenious, I gotta say, but my personal preference is I really like the look of the Royal Quiet Deluxe case. So the Quiet Deluxe case not only has a set of feet on the back for setting it up on end like that, but it has a set of rubber feet on the bottom as well for setting it down like that. And that particular feature I really like better than the holiday case. The holiday case, when you set it down on its bottom, it's going to get scuffed up and scratched very easily, and there's evidence of that right here. It took me a long time to clean up this case to the condition that it's in, whereas this case generally stays in nicer shape. The ones I've seen out there in the wild, it looks like they stay in better condition because they have feet that protect both the bottom and the rear of the case. To put the Quiet Deluxe back into its case, you're first going to want to lock the carriage, which you do by pushing down this lever on the left side, and that locks it into place. Then you're going to want to engage this slot with this tang right here in the back of its case. You basically can just sit it down and push it to the rear. You make sure that the feet are sitting down in the brackets. You pull these two levers forward, and it's secure. And it closes up nicely like that. For the holiday case of the Smith Corona, you want to first make sure you lock the carriage on the Smith Corona by this little lever on the right side underneath in front of the right platen knob. It'll lock it like that. Again, you want to match the slot in the back of the typewriter with this little tang on the back of that bracket. It's going to sit on that bracket kind of spring-loaded like, and you want to push it down and make sure it locks, and then test it to make sure it doesn't pull up. And from there, close it up. My particular holiday case, the lid is warped, and so I have to make sure that the latch locks in place before I pick it up. When you're carrying the typewriter by hand in and out of its case, you'll notice on the Royal there is a very thin edge of metal around the rim to hold with your fingers. And the weight of the typewriter, it does kind of feel like it cuts into your finger. It's not quite as easy to carry, whereas on the Smith Corona there's a wider flange of metal, of sheet metal, where the body panels wrap around, and you can see the lower frame of the machine. There's a lot more purchase for your finger when you're carrying it. So yeah, the Royal feels like you're carrying it on these thin rims of metal, and if you have strong hands it's not an issue, but if you have sensitive skin and delicate hands, it really feels like this is harder to carry. I was trying to figure out why I like the feel of the Smith Corona's keyboard better than the Royal Quiet Deluxe, so I started off by measuring the size or the width of the keyboards. First of all, taking the front row from the left edge of the Z key to the left edge of the slash key, it's 6 3/4 inches, and on the Smith Corona it is also 6 3/4 inches, so both keyboards are the same width. Now, how wide are the keys themselves? On the Royal Quiet Deluxe, the keys are 9/16 inches wide, whereas on the Smith Corona, it looks like the keys are also 9/16 inches wide. So it looks to me like the horizontal spacing and size of both typewriters, the keyboards are the same. So if I'm going to try to understand why one typewriter feels better than the other, I'm going to have to do a little bit more detailed measuring. So this is something I wanted to measure, is how steeply the keyboard slopes up on both models. We know the width of the keyboard is the same. Let's measure from the table. Let's just get a relative idea here. So the top, the plus equals key is at 74 millimeters, and the slash question mark is at 46.5, equals 27.5 millimeters difference from the back right key to the front right key. And also I want to measure how far back the keys go. So I'm going to measure from the front of the front key to the front of the rear key on the right side here. And so that looks to be about 68.5 millimeters. 68.5 millimeters. Okay, on the Smith Corona, 93, and the front right key is 63.5, which is 29.5 millimeters difference between the front key and the back key in height. Now let's measure the distance from the front edge of the front key to the front edge of the back key, and it looks like it's 66 millimeters. So for finding the angle of the tier of keys, so you have your different rows of keys like this, we basically measured the height here, and we measured the slope or the hypotenuse of the triangle here, and we want to know the angle. So the angle is going to be the arc sine of the height divided by the slope. So let's take the Smith Corona. It has a vertical height of 29.5, and it has a hypotenuse of 66. You divide that and then find the arc sign, and the angle that the keyboard raises up is at an angle of 26.55 degrees. Whereas the Royal Quiet Deluxe, it has a height of 27.5, it has a hypotenuse of 68.5, and its angle is going to be 23.67 degrees. So the Silent Super slopes up, the keyboard does, at a slightly steeper angle, about 3 degrees steeper than the Royal Quiet Deluxe. So perhaps this explains why I like the feel of the Smith Corona keyboard better. Even though the keyboard slopes at a slightly steeper angle than the Royal, it then doesn't have the vertical obstruction of the ribbon cover. So both of these kind of make one continuous kind of angle, and it doesn't really get in the way of my fingers as much up here when I'm typing like this. Whereas the Royal, its keyboard is a little bit flatter than the Smith Corona, but all of a sudden it has this really vertical rise in the ribbon cover, and it kind of causes my fingers to kind of hit back here if I'm using the two-fingered typing technique, which I know I shouldn't be, but I often do. So a little bit different keyboard feel, and also the crowdedness of the shift lock key to the A key. Just makes it a little more prone for misstriking the A. I think there is a lot to like on both machines, and this is one of those comparisons where it usually comes down to personal preferences. Which parameters are more important to you? Are you more of a design, aesthetic person, or are you more of a functionality person? I think as far as functionality, the Silent Super probably edges out the Quiet Deluxe. The way the keyboard feels, certainly for my hands, and the way the keycaps articulate, matching the motion of your fingers a little bit better. I like the quick removal platen. That's certainly handy for cleaning, but also for doing things like taking the platen out to get it recovered in new rubber. Makes it really convenient. On the other hand, the Quiet Deluxe has more color options if you're collecting them. The magic margin is really super handy. There's a lot to like about the Royal. I think, though, for my purposes, the keyboard just feels a little more cramped for my particular writing style. For carrying the machine from the case to a table or whatever, the sharp edge on the bottom of the Royal just feels a little bit less comfortable to me. It all comes down to personal preferences, and I think both of these machines, though, are a welcome addition to any typewriter collection. If you're a collector and you're looking to get into a medium-sized American-made mid-20th century portable typewriter, you really can't go wrong with either one of these. And despite the differences in features between both models, whether or not the actual typewriter you acquire will please you or not has more to do with the condition of the individual machine. So let's say I prefer the Silent Super a little bit better than the Quiet Deluxe. The fact is, if the Silent Super was in worse condition, I would probably say the Quiet Deluxe is a better machine. For that reason, because these are getting on upwards of 60 or more years old. Pick out which machine you like for the features and then do some careful shopping. Make sure you get a machine that's in really good shape. Preferably, it's worth spending a little bit extra money and buying a machine from a professional typewriter repair person who has gone over and completely serviced it, and you get more of a guarantee that it's going to work properly. Well, these are great machines. They're both really keepers in my collection, serving a very similar purposes, I think. Medium-sized portables. They have the functionality of a full-size standard typewriter and the portability or luggability to be able to take them around different places. I'd like to know your thoughts about what do you think about the Quiet Deluxe versus the Silent Supers? Do you have any preference? Do you like them both? Maybe you don't like either one. I'd like to hear your comments. Leave some down below and let's have a dialogue about these. And until next time, I hope you stay safe and stay well and stay creative. Have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye, everybody.